put the groceries back. The cashier reached for the paper bags. An elderly man lowered his eyes, his trembling fingers searching every pocket of his worn coat for money that wasn't there. I'm sorry," he whispered. A customer behind him scoffed. "If you can't afford dinner, don't waste everyone else's time." Another rolled her eyes. People like him always expect someone else to pay. The old man said nothing. His shoulders sank as the cashier began removing bread, milk, and canned soup from the counter. Before another item could be taken away, a calm voice broke the silence. "Please charge everything to my card." A beautiful plus-size woman stepped forward and placed her bank card on the register. The old man stared at her in disbelief. She answered with nothing more than a gentle smile. "Everyone deserves to go home with dinner." The supermarket fell strangely quiet. Outside, a man in a dark suit touched the earpiece hidden beneath his collar. "Sir, your grandfather has just been approached." No one inside realized the frail old man they had mocked was Arthur Romano, the beloved grandfather of Chicago's most feared Mafia boss. For a long moment, Arthur Romano remained standing beside the checkout counter, his grocery bags untouched. The embarrassed silence that had settled over the supermarket lingered long after the cruel remarks had faded. The customers who had mocked him suddenly found the tiled floor fascinating. Even the cashier, who had only been following store policy, looked uncomfortable. The woman who had stepped in didn't appear angry. She didn't glare at anyone. She didn't ask for recognition. She simply accepted her receipt, handed Arthur one of the heavier bags, and smiled as though helping a stranger was the most ordinary thing in the world. "You really shouldn't have done this," Arthur said softly, still trying to process what had happened. She shrugged with an easy smile. "I know." He blinked, surprised. "But I'm glad I did." Arthur cleared his throat. "At least let me reimburse you." She shook her head. "No, I insist, and I politely refuse." The corners of Arthur's mouth lifted despite himself. "You drive a hard bargain." "I own a bookstore," she replied with a quiet laugh. "Negotiating comes with the job." For the first time since realizing his wallet was missing, Arthur laughed as well. The sound felt unfamiliar after the humiliation of the last few minutes. "What if I simply want to thank you?" Emily adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag before answering. "Then promise me something. Anything. If you ever see someone else having a bad day." She glanced toward the checkout lanes where the impatient customers had suddenly become very quiet. "Be the person who makes it a little better." Arthur studied her face. There was no calculation. No curiosity. No attempt to discover who he was. No expectation that the elderly man before her could somehow change her life. Only kindness. The kind that existed because someone chose it every single day. "You don't even know my name," Arthur observed. She smiled. "I don't need to." Then, almost as an afterthought, she extended her hand. "I'm Emily. Arthur." They shook hands like two old neighbors meeting for the first time. "Take care of yourself, Arthur." "You too, Emily." She picked up her own shopping bag and headed toward the exit without looking back. Arthur watched until she disappeared through the automatic doors. Only then did one of the discreet security agents approach from outside. "Mr. Romano, are you all right?" Arthur nodded. "I am now." As another guard retrieved the forgotten wallet from the back seat of the waiting car, Arthur looked across the parking lot just in time to see Emily unlocking a weathered blue hatchback. On the rear window was a small decal, Carter's Corner Bookstore. Arthur quietly repeated the name to himself. Once, then again, making certain he would never forget it. That evening, the Romano family gathered for dinner inside the penthouse overlooking downtown Chicago. The dining room reflected generations of success, yet the atmosphere remained surprisingly warm. Vincent Romano arrived late from a board meeting. His tailored charcoal suit carried the authority expected of the chairman of Romano Global. The men who worked for him feared disappointing him. The business world respected him. But before greeting anyone else, he walked directly to his grandfather. "How was your afternoon?" Arthur smiled over his cup of tea. "Interesting." Vincent immediately noticed the amusement in his eyes. What happened? Arthur recounted every detail: the forgotten wallet, the impatient customers, the insults. The young woman who stepped forward before anyone else could. Vincent listened without interrupting. His expression remained unreadable, but the room grew noticeably quieter. When Arthur finished, Vincent asked only one question. "She never asked who you were?" Arthur leaned back in his chair, his smile deepening. "No, she never asked what I could give her. She never even wondered whether I was important." He paused. She simply saw an old man who needed help. Silence settled over the room. Finally, Vincent spoke in the same calm voice that had built an empire. "Find her." One of his senior aides looked up immediately. "For what purpose, sir?" Vincent's answer came without hesitation. "I want to meet the woman who treated my grandfather with dignity, when everyone else chose convenience." 3 days passed before Vincent Romano walked through the door of Carter's Corner bookstore. The brass bell above the entrance chimed softly. Unlike the polished marble lobbies of Romano Global's headquarters, the little bookstore welcomed visitors with worn wooden shelves, handwritten recommendation cards, and the comforting scent of old paper mixed with fresh coffee. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't luxurious. Yet it felt strangely alive. Emily looked up from a stack of newly arrived books and smiled with the same warmth Arthur had described. "Good morning." Vincent returned a polite nod. "Morning." She tilted her head, studying him for a moment. "You look like someone who's either searching for a very specific book," she paused dramatically, "or completely lost." A faint smile touched Vincent's lips. "I'm looking for business strategy." Emily glanced at his perfectly tailored suit, expensive watch, and polished shoes. "I guessed." "You did. You have the spreadsheet face." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure whether that's a compliment." "It isn't." She laughed before he could respond. "It just means you probably spend too much time solving problems and not enough time reading stories." He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him without the slightest concern for his status. No hesitation, no flattery, no fear. She simply treated him like another customer. Emily led him toward a shelf, labeled Business and Leadership. She ran her fingers across several titles before stopping. "You could buy any of these." Vincent glanced at the books. "They're all bestsellers." "They are," she nodded. "And they're all predictable." Instead of handing him a business book, she reached for a novel with a colorful illustrated cover. He looked at the title, then back at her. "This is a romance." "It certainly is." "I asked for business." "I know." She folded her arms with playful confidence. Successful business people spend all day studying profit, competition, and negotiations. And they desperately need happier endings. Vincent let out a quiet chuckle. "I've never heard that recommendation before." "That's because most booksellers want repeat customers." "You don't?" "I do." She grinned. "But I also like surprising them." Against all logic, Vincent bought the novel. As she placed it into a paper bag, Emily smiled. "When you finish it, come back. You assume I'll read it." "I assume curiosity eventually defeats pride." He almost corrected her. Instead, he simply accepted the bag. "I'll let you know. I'll be waiting." The following Tuesday, he returned. Emily looked up from arranging children's books. "You finished it already?" "I did." "And?" Vincent hesitated. "It was..." She leaned forward expectantly. "Better than I expected." She crossed her arms triumphantly. "I knew it. It wasn't exactly realistic." Neither is becoming a billionaire before 40. He blinked. What makes you think I'm a billionaire? She laughed. I don't. But that watch could probably pay my rent for a year. Vincent instinctively glanced at the watch he had forgotten to remove. So you're observant. I own a bookstore. She shrugged. My job is noticing details. She handed him another novel before he could ask for anything. This one's even better. I came for economics. No, I didn't even ask yet. You were going to? He looked genuinely amused. How are you so certain? Because people like routines. She smiled knowingly. And I enjoy interrupting them. Week after week, the pattern continued. Vincent always entered claiming to need books about management, finance, or leadership. Emily always found an excuse to place a romance novel into his hands instead. Soon, their conversations became longer. Sometimes they debated fictional characters. Sometimes they disagreed over endings. Sometimes Emily insisted that the strongest people were not those who controlled others, but those who remained kind after disappointment. Vincent found himself thinking about those conversations during board meetings. He even caught himself reading late into the night, not because he particularly loved romance novels, but because he wanted to understand why Emily loved them so much. Without realizing it, the bookstore had become the calmest part of his week. His executive assistant eventually noticed the growing stack of brightly colored novels on his office shelf. I didn't know you liked romance books, sir. Vincent glanced toward the window overlooking Chicago's skyline. I didn't either. The assistant hesitated before asking, should I continue investigating Ms. Carter? Vincent was silent for several moments. His original intention had been simple: repay a debt. Thank the woman who had protected his grandfather's dignity. Yet every visit made that purpose feel less honest. He no longer walked into Carter's corner because he owed Emily something. He walked in because leaving always made him wonder how many days remained until he could hear her laugh again. By the fourth week, Arthur Romano no longer needed an excuse to visit Carter's corner bookstore. He arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon, carrying nothing more than a reusable shopping bag and the promise that he was looking for another mystery novel. Emily welcomed him with the same bright smile she offered every customer. Back already? Arthur chuckled. I finished the last one. So quickly. I may have stayed up far later than a 74-year-old man should. She laughed. That's exactly what a good book is supposed to do. The bookstore was unusually peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the front windows, illuminating rows of well-loved shelves that had clearly served the neighborhood for decades. A young mother browsed children's books, while soft jazz played from an old speaker behind the register. Arthur watched Emily move naturally from one customer to another. She remembered names. She remembered favorite authors. She even remembered which little boy refused to read anything unless dragons appeared before chapter 3. No interaction felt forced. She treated every visitor as though they mattered. It reminded Arthur of a world he feared had slowly disappeared. Business slowed during the afternoon. Emily placed 2 mugs of tea on a small reading table near the window. I hope chamomile is okay. Arthur smiled. It's my favorite. You guessed. No. She grinned. I asked your grandson's assistant last week. Arthur blinked. You knew. She nodded casually. I suspected after the second man in a black suit pretended to spend 30 minutes reading the gardening section upside down. Arthur burst into laughter, loud enough to startle a nearby customer. I'll have to speak with them. They're very polite. They're terrible detectives. They're improving. The warmth between them felt effortless. After a comfortable silence, Arthur noticed Emily staring thoughtfully into her tea. May I ask you something? Of course. What made you help me that day? Emily's smile softened. For several moments she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice carried memories that had never completely faded. My father got sick when I was in college. Arthur listened quietly. He owned a small repair shop. After the treatment started, customers disappeared. The bills kept arriving. And eventually, she paused. There wasn't enough money for everything. Arthur could almost picture the younger Emily trying to remain hopeful while life slowly became heavier. One evening, she continued, Dad stopped at a grocery store after work. He thought he had enough. He didn't. Arthur lowered his eyes. The story already sounded painfully familiar. He called me afterward. He never cried in front of me. But I could hear it in his voice. Emily wrapped both hands around her cup. He told me someone he'd never met quietly paid the difference. They didn't wait for thanks. They didn't tell him their name. They simply smiled and left. Arthur remained silent. Do you know what my father said when he came home? Emily looked toward the books lining the walls. He said that dignity can be the greatest gift a stranger ever gives you. She swallowed gently before continuing. That person didn't just buy groceries. They reminded my father he wasn't alone. The bookstore became very still, so I made myself a promise. Arthur nodded. If life ever gave me the chance, I'd become that stranger for someone else. That evening, Arthur repeated every word to Vincent. Neither man touched the expensive dinner waiting before them. Vincent listened more carefully than he had listened to any board presentation in years. So that was why, he murmured. Arthur nodded. She wasn't helping me because she thought I deserved it. She was honoring someone she'll probably never meet again. Vincent stared out across the Chicago skyline. Every merger he had negotiated, every skyscraper his company had built, every fortune he had accumulated. None of it seemed capable of creating the kind of legacy one anonymous act of kindness had left behind. We spend our lives measuring wealth with numbers, Arthur said quietly. Emily measures it with people. Those words stayed with Vincent long after the conversation ended. The following afternoon, he found himself standing once again inside Carter's corner. Emily looked up with a teasing smile already forming. Let me guess. He folded his arms. I haven't said anything yet. You don't need to. She reached for a novel from the display beside the register. You came for another business book. Vincent smiled despite himself. I did. She handed him a romance novel instead. I know. For the first time in years, the most powerful man in Chicago realized he wasn't returning for the books anymore. He was returning because every visit reminded him that there were still people in the world who believed kindness was worth giving, even when nobody was watching. By early autumn, Carter's corner bookstore had become busier than it had been in years. Word of Emily's thoughtful recommendations had spread through the neighborhood. Families lingered longer between the shelves. Local reading clubs chose her store as their meeting place. Sales were still modest, but for the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to believe the bookstore might survive. When the Chicago Literacy Alliance announced its annual fundraising gala, Emily was invited to represent independent bookstores across the city. She hesitated before accepting. Formal events had never been her favorite, not because she disliked people, because she had grown used to being judged before anyone spoke to her. Still, literacy mattered too much to refuse. So she ironed her favorite navy blue dress, tied her hair back with simple elegance, and reminded herself that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Executives, publishers, educators, and philanthropists mingled beneath soft music while cameras captured every important handshake. Emily felt slightly out of place, but she greeted everyone with the same warmth she offered customers in her bookstore. Several teachers thanked her for donating books to neighborhood schools. A librarian hugged her after recognizing her name. Those small conversations eased her nerves, until another voice interrupted. Well, Melissa Grant approached with practiced elegance, dressed in an expensive designer gown that seemed chosen to command attention. I didn't expect Carter's Corner to receive an invitation. Emily smiled politely. It's a literacy fundraiser. Melissa glanced around the ballroom. I assumed invitations were based on influence. Emily ignored the remark. I'm happy to support reading in any way I can. Melissa's smile never reached her eyes. How admirable. Within moments, a small crowd had gathered, sensing tension. Melissa casually picked up one of the books, displayed on Emily's promotional table. So, this is what everyone's talking about. She examined the cover with exaggerated curiosity before setting it down carelessly. I suppose charity has become fashionable. Emily frowned slightly. I'm sorry? Melissa tilted her head. Let's be honest. Her voice carried just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. People don't support struggling little bookstores because they're successful. She took one slow step closer. They support them because they feel sorry for the owner. The surrounding conversations began to fade. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Emily kept her composure. I don't believe kindness comes from pity. Melissa laughed softly. Of course you would say that. She looked Emily up and down without attempting to hide her contempt. Pity is probably something you've become accustomed to. The words landed harder than Melissa could have known. Not because Emily believed them, because she had spent years hearing similar comments from strangers who assumed appearance determined worth. She took a slow breath. I came here to support literacy. So did I, Melissa replied. The difference is that I built something people admire. Before Emily could answer, Melissa turned as though to leave. Her designer handbag caught the corner of the display table. Whether intentional or not, every stack of carefully arranged books crashed onto the polished floor. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. Dozens of novels scattered in every direction. For one suspended moment, no one moved. Emily instinctively knelt to gather them. As she reached for the nearest book, Melissa leaned down just enough for only those closest to hear. Women like you, she whispered coldly, should learn where they belong. The sentence carried farther than Melissa intended. Several people heard every word. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. Emily continued collecting the fallen books with steady hands, refusing to let anyone see the hurt rising behind her calm expression. Then, another pair of hands reached for the books beside hers. Large, steady, confident. She looked up. Vincent Romano had quietly knelt beside her. Without saying a single word, he picked up another book, brushed invisible dust from its cover, and placed it gently into the growing stack. The ballroom watched in complete silence. No one yet understood that the next few moments would permanently change Emily Carter's life. For several long seconds, the ballroom remained silent. The only sound was the soft rustle of pages as Vincent Romano continued gathering the scattered books one by one. He did not appear embarrassed to be kneeling on the polished marble floor in an expensive tailored suit. He did not seem concerned that dozens of influential guests were watching. To him, there was nothing remarkable about helping someone who deserved better. Emily stared at him, surprised. You don't have to do this, she whispered. Without looking up, Vincent answered calmly, I know. The words instantly reminded her of another conversation. The supermarket. Arthur. She had spoken those same words only weeks earlier. Vincent carefully stacked the final novel in his hands before offering it to her. Neither did you. Emily accepted the books, unable to find an answer. Melissa folded her arms. Mr. Romano. Her polished smile returned, as though nothing unusual had happened. I didn't realize you knew Miss Carter. Vincent rose to his full height. Now, every eye in the ballroom rested on him. The chairman of Romano Global rarely attended charity events in person. When he spoke, people listened. We've met. Melissa laughed lightly. What a small world. It is. Vincent's voice remained even, small enough that character becomes impossible to hide. The smile on Melissa's face stiffened. I beg your pardon? He turned toward Emily, instead of answering immediately. She still held several books against her chest. Not one complaint had left her lips, not one angry word, even after being humiliated in front of an entire ballroom. Vincent admired that strength more than any business achievement he had ever witnessed. He finally faced the audience. I've spent years listening to presentations about literacy. His voice carried effortlessly across the room. We discuss reading statistics, educational funding, corporate responsibility. He paused. But today, I witnessed something far more important. No one interrupted. We tell children that books build empathy. He glanced toward the novels scattered moments earlier. Yet empathy means very little if we leave it inside the pages. The silence grew even heavier. Vincent looked directly at Melissa. You spoke about influence, so let me use mine. The chairman of the Chicago Literacy Alliance stepped forward uncertainly. Mr. Romano. Vincent gave a slight nod. Effective immediately. Romano Global will establish a citywide partnership supporting independent bookstores throughout Chicago. Gasps spread across the ballroom. Several reporters immediately lifted their cameras. The chairman blinked in disbelief. A partnership? Yes. A long-term literacy initiative. Community grants. School reading programs. Building renovations. Author events. Children's outreach. His words came with calm certainty, the kind of certainty that transformed promises into reality. The chairman could barely speak. That would be extraordinary. Vincent continued. The first bookstore selected for the program. He turned toward Emily. Will be Carter's Corner. Emily's eyes widened. What? The room erupted into whispers. Melissa's confident expression disappeared completely. One publisher leaned toward another. How much is Romano Global committing? Whatever it is, it'll change the entire industry. Emily shook her head. Mr. Romano. Vincent. She hesitated. Vincent. I can't accept something because you feel obligated. His expression softened. Who said anything about obligation? She looked genuinely confused. Your grandfather. The groceries. I don't want charity. Vincent smiled gently. I'm relieved, because I wasn't offering charity. He took one slow step closer. His next words were spoken clearly enough for everyone in the ballroom to hear. I'm offering partnership. Another long silence followed. Then he added the sentence that no reporter would forget. I'm not supporting Emily Carter because she once helped my grandfather. He paused deliberately. I'm supporting her because she reminds this city what kindness looks like. The words struck the audience with unexpected force. Many of the guests had known Emily for only a few minutes, yet every one of them had witnessed her quiet dignity. She had never defended herself, never insulted Melissa in return, never demanded sympathy. She had simply picked up her books. The applause began with a single elderly librarian standing near the back of the room. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet. Teachers applauded. Authors applauded. Publishers applauded. Even guests who had remained silent during Melissa's insults now joined the ovation. Emily blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. She wasn't accustomed to being seen. Not like this. Not for the right reasons. Melissa realized every camera in the ballroom had shifted away from her. The admiration she had hoped to receive now belonged entirely to Emily. She attempted one final smile. I'm sure this has all been misunderstood. No one answered. The silence surrounding her felt colder than any argument. Without another word, Melissa picked up her purse and walked toward the exit. The ballroom doors closed quietly behind her. No one tried to stop her. As the applause gradually faded, Arthur Romano appeared near the entrance. He had arrived only moments earlier. Watching from the back of the room, he smiled proudly. Not because Vincent had announced a generous investment. Money had never impressed him. He smiled because his grandson had finally made a decision that had nothing to do with power, everything to do with heart. And as Vincent looked toward Emily once again, Arthur recognized something long before either of them would admit it aloud. Vincent Romano had started searching for a woman worthy of gratitude. Somewhere along the way, he had found the woman he could no longer imagine living without. The headlines appeared before sunrise. Romano Global announces historic literacy initiative. Billionaire chairman defends independent bookstore owner. Kindness takes center stage. At city fundraiser. By the time Carter's Corner bookstore opened the following morning, customers were already waiting outside. Some wanted to buy books. Others wanted to congratulate Emily. Several simply wanted to shake the hand of the woman whose quiet dignity had inspired one of Chicago's most influential businessmen. Emily accepted every kind word with gratitude. Yet beneath her smile, one question refused to leave her mind. Why? Why would Vincent Romano do something so extraordinary for her? Late that afternoon, the familiar brass bell chimed above the bookstore door. Vincent stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Emily looked up from arranging a display of children's classics. "You've become predictable." He smiled. "So have you. You brought coffee. You were going to forget to drink yours again." She laughed softly. "I only forgot once. It was 3 times." She sighed dramatically. "I liked you better when you only argued about romance novels. I still do." He placed 1 cup on the counter. For a few quiet moments, neither of them spoke. Outside, pedestrians drifted past the windows, while autumn leaves danced along the sidewalk. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "Why did you really do it?" Vincent met her eyes. "The partnership. Everything." She looked down at her hands. "The fundraiser. The bookstore. The way you stood beside me." Her voice became quieter. "What? You barely knew me." Vincent's expression softened. "Are you sure about that?" Before Emily could answer, the front door opened again. Arthur Romano walked inside with his usual warm smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Emily brightened immediately. "Arthur!" She hurried around the counter to hug him. Vincent watched the embrace with quiet affection. Arthur chuckled. "I've missed my favorite bookseller, and I've missed my favorite customer. You only say that because I buy too many mystery novels. I say it because you always return them with excellent recommendations." Arthur laughed before turning toward his grandson. "Vincent." There was a brief look between them, one filled with unspoken understanding. Arthur gently placed a weathered leather wallet on the counter. Emily recognized it instantly. "The grocery store." Arthur nodded. "I've been meaning to tell you something." She frowned slightly. "What is it?" "The day we met. I wasn't simply an old man who forgot his wallet." Vincent stepped beside his grandfather. Emily looked from one face to the other. Confusion slowly replaced curiosity. Arthur continued gently. "My full name is Arthur Romano." The color faded from Emily's face. She turned toward Vincent. "Romano?" He nodded once. "My grandfather." Emily stared in disbelief. "The Romano family?" "Yes." "The Romano Global Romano?" "Yes." Her mind raced through every newspaper article she had ever seen, every magazine cover, every television interview. She looked around the little bookstore as though expecting the walls themselves to explain what was happening. I don't understand." Arthur quietly squeezed her hand. "My grandson wanted to thank the woman who treated me with kindness." Emily slowly turned toward Vincent. "So, the first day you came here, you already knew who I was?" I did. She stepped back. And every visit after that. Yes. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument. Emily looked hurt rather than angry. You should have told me. I wanted to. So why didn't you? Vincent answered with complete honesty. Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being about thanking you. She searched his face. I don't understand. He took one slow step closer. The day you paid for my grandfather's groceries. You believed you were helping one elderly stranger. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You were actually changing the future of the man who loves him most. She lowered her gaze. I never expected anything in return. I know. That's exactly why I kept coming back. He smiled with quiet tenderness. I didn't fall in love with the woman who paid the grocery bill. A tear escaped down Emily's cheek. I fell in love with the woman who never asked for credit afterward. The bookstore fell perfectly silent. Even Arthur quietly stepped farther away, giving them the moment they deserved. Emily shook her head slowly. You know who you are. She looked at Vincent with fragile uncertainty. You're admired, powerful, successful. She laughed weakly through her tears. And then there's me. I own one little bookstore. I've spent years hearing people say, women who look like me should be grateful for whatever attention they receive. She swallowed hard. I stopped expecting anyone would ever truly choose me. Without hesitation, Vincent reached for her hand. His voice remained calm, firm, certain. They never looked closely enough. Emily looked into his eyes. I saw the woman who made frightened children smile with stories. I saw the woman who remembered every customer's favorite author. I saw the daughter who turned one stranger's kindness into a promise that changed countless lives. He gently squeezed her hand. And every time I walked through that door, I never once saw a woman who needed to become someone else. I only saw the woman I hoped would someday choose me. Emily could no longer hold back her tears. Not because her heart was breaking, but because, for the very first time in her life, someone had fallen in love with her heart long before noticing anything else. Arthur quietly smiled toward the bookshelves. Some gifts could never be purchased. They could only be earned, and his grandson had finally found one. Winter gradually gave way to spring. For the first time in many years, Carter's Corner bookstore no longer struggled to survive from month to month. Thanks to the partnership established through the Romano Foundation, the little neighborhood shop had become the heart of a citywide reading initiative. Every Saturday morning, children filled the reading corner with laughter as volunteers read stories aloud. Local authors held free workshops for aspiring writers. Teachers borrowed classroom collections without worrying about limited school budgets. Shelves that had once stood half empty were now filled with donated books waiting to find new homes. Emily often paused in the middle of the busy afternoons just to watch the smiles around her. The bookstore had always been her dream. Now it had become something even greater. It had become hope shared with an entire community. Vincent never tried to take credit. Whenever reporters asked about the project, he redirected the attention elsewhere. The foundation provides resources, he would say. Emily provides the heart. She always rolled her eyes whenever she heard the quote. And you keep embarrassing me. He smiled. I'll probably never stop. Arthur remained the bookstore's most loyal visitor. Every Saturday afternoon, he appeared carrying a different mystery novel under his arm. He insisted he came only to browse. No one believed him, especially not Emily. You've already read that one twice, she teased one weekend. Arthur looked completely innocent. I forgot how it ended. Vincent laughed. You solved the mystery before chapter 5. Arthur shrugged. That doesn't mean I can't enjoy it again. Emily shook her head affectionately. You aren't checking on the books. Arthur smiled knowingly. No, I'm checking on the people. His eyes moved from Emily to Vincent. Finding them smiling beside one another was all the reassurance he ever needed. One sunny afternoon, a little girl wandered into the bookstore, holding a stack of picture books, almost as tall as she was. She looked up at Emily with complete seriousness. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Emily replied. The little girl pointed toward Vincent, who was carrying several heavy boxes of new books from the delivery truck. "Why does that handsome man always carry everything for you?" Emily glanced toward Vincent. He looked back with the same gentle smile that had first appeared the day he walked into her bookstore, pretending to buy business books. She laughed softly before answering. "Because he says I carried something much heavier." The little girl frowned. What was it? Before Emily could answer, Vincent walked over and gently placed the final box on the floor. He smiled warmly. She carried kindness. He reached for Emily's hand. "Long before she ever carried my heart." The little girl smiled, as though the answer made perfect sense. Emily's eyes met Vincent's. No grand speeches were needed anymore. No secrets remained between them. Only quiet certainty. Together, they locked the bookstore at closing time and stepped onto the sidewalk as the evening sun painted Chicago in shades of gold. Arthur watched from inside the front window with quiet satisfaction. Months earlier, one small act of kindness had cost Emily only a few dollars. She had expected nothing in return, yet that single choice had restored an old man's dignity, healed a lonely heart, created a family that neither she nor Vincent had ever expected to find, and proved that the greatest fortunes in life are never measured by money. They are measured by the lives we choose to lift along the way.